Welcome to Lead Story Prime. Minister Favour Williams has just opened the budget debate in Parliament. And tonight, for the first time in 10 years, Jamaicans are being asked to pay new taxes. But you heard that already in February. The minister called this budget, and I quote, a moment of consequence. That's a turning point, a critical juncture. And in one important respect, she's right. Hurricane Melissa left this country with a bill that the minister confirmed stands at US $12.2 billion. That's an increase from the 8.8 you're accustomed to hearing. And that's now a 56.7% of this country's annual economic output. An increase from what you heard before, 41%. The government has assembled an international support package of US $6.7 billion. And it has introduced a Jamaica $18 billion new tax measure package. Plus a whole line item added into the discussions that we had before, but separated now, the $11.4 billion transferred from the National Housing Trust to help close what remains. But tonight, Lead Story Prime is not here to summarize the speech of the minister. You can go listen to it. We are here instead to interrogate it. I'm Jody Ann Quarry, and this is Lead Story Prime. Today was budget day, a day that many people look forward to. If you're old enough, you remember when budget day was a day where you were anticipating the numbers of taxes. But for the last 10 years, we haven't. Minister Williams has now spoken, though. And joining me tonight are some people who will help unpack what it is that she has said. We have economists Joseph Cox and Janelle McEwen with us. And later on in the show, we'll have President of the Small Business Association of Jamaica, Garnet Reid. Now, the minister spoke today, gentlemen, and we'll be interrogating something that she said. Because tonight I want to put something before the panel immediately. The minister called this budget, the 2026 to 2027 budget, a moment of consequence. And then she did something unexpected. She acknowledged on the floor of Parliament, and I quote, he is right that the capital underspending at the level of government is an issue. He being the independent fiscal commissioner, Courtney Williams. Now, that's big because we've now seen the IFC respond and the minister responding back. Joseph Cox, starting off with you here as we watch the minister now have this conversation, conceding perhaps the single most important structural concern in a report that came out after her budget had been tabled, but before this opening of the budget presentation. Is it a really big deal that she's having this interaction with now this brand new body that has been created to investigate Jamaica's economy?
Well, of course, it's significant, but the fact of life is that this is what the Independent Fiscal Commission was established for, to do precisely this. So, for me, it's not so much that it is surprising, but it is good that there is that healthy interaction, because under circumstances like these, sometimes the political directorate gets unduly defensive, and therefore the conversations sometimes become very unproductive. So I will give her credit for that with no hesitation at all. But the fact of life, Jody, as we look at the budget, the question for me still remains. I was looking for more. I suppose I wanted more. I suppose I'm a modern day Oliver Twist. Can I have some more? Because it struck me that some of the questions that we had about the revenue package, we still haven't answered. I was looking for more details in terms of overall fiscal performance. And for me, and I suppose I'm one of those data nerds, I was actually looking for a more detailed discussion with respect to things like the tax foregone, with the duty waivers that granted between what was that, end of November through the middle of January. Because I know those things, you see, for me, what I'm really looking for, and I'm not knocking the minister in her presentation, not 1 minute, but I was looking for more details. And that is a part of it that concerns me up to this point.
All right, Janelle McKeown, let me pull you in here on this as well, because the Minister of Finance and the Public Service, Favour Williams, said that Jamaica would have met her last year in her first time as budget presenting finance minister. This time, they now know what they'll be getting with her. You've now heard her not only make her budget presentation, but interact with the Independent Fiscal Commission. What was your feeling on the budget as presented today?
Well, firstly, we must celebrate that we have an independent fiscal commission, and it is important that we acknowledge that first, because gone are the days we just have the government list what's in the budget, and then when the political discourse starts from the other side, then a lot of critiques that are really sound, you just get lost in this squabble. And it's really good that we have independent opinion commenting on these issues, and it shows you how important it is, especially with GDP projections that the ministry has in their budget, and how the fiscal commission really critique. Is it that they're expecting the consumer price index or inflation rise to that significant level, given the fact that we have already started recovery, as she stated, that we have spent approximately 67 billion currently. That includes the 150 million US that JPS would have received. So if it is that we're seeing inflation at such low level, and the restructuring has already kick-started, how much more should we expect it? In her defense, she tried to differentiate between the consumer price index and the GDP data, which there is a difference. Yeah. However, the point still stands. If it is that we already kick-started recovery, we have spent approximately 67 billion already. When we incorporate the NRA, which I was expecting Minister to speak more about, because this is the agency or the body that should be guiding or recovery efforts. So it was really a good job, but the point still stands. If it is that we're expecting nominally grow at 9 to 12%, what do we expect the inflation rate to be, given that we know what the inflation was last time we checked? It was around 3.9%, and they can't go on. And if we have economic growth so high, it must come with an inflation rate.
I think it's important that some of the things that you've raised are things that we're going to be digging into later on in this show, including NARA. That's the National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority. That's meant to be the big driver of public sector projects. However, that's something that has a bit of a twist to it, given some things that the minister had said later in her presentation. We're also looking at, as you said, where are the foregone taxes, something that Joseph Cox has made mention of, and then you asking us, all right, so where are all the other pieces to this as well? Since we're finding out what our panel thinks of the minister's presentation, I introduce the third member of our panel, Garnet Reid, president of the Small Business Association. President Reid, you're here. You heard the minister open the budget presentation in the debate today, talking about what the nation was expecting from her. This had been tabled in February, so we had seen a lot of what the minister would have been talking about, including new taxes. But as you heard the minister make her presentation today, does anything jump out at you or strike you as you heard her now explain to the country not only what the medicine would be, but any sweeteners in there that would make it a little more palatable for Jamaicans?
Good. You mentioned about the sweetness. And one of the things that, I was in Parliament today and I listened to her live and direct. One of the things, though, is that we meet with the minister a couple of weeks ago before she make her budget presentation. And when we went to see the minister, we mentioned to her that there is all SME are entitled for 20% set aside contract to SME. And she shaped the budget, read SME on that, and I must commend her for that. Good move, and there was a lot of sweeten. We get a lot
so
of
she was
sweeten
taking the feedback then.
from it, right?
Yes.
And so I think all SME sector must be happy today, where we will be entitled for a 20% set aside.
And this is by the Ministry of Finance as we do the reconstructing of Jamaica?
We are now, we are now having a number of training and a number of meetings for the SME sector for them to qualify for the 20% set aside for all SME, and that's really big news. That's headline for tomorrow. Good. I was a little disappointed though that I did not hear more where what's the allocation for the Development Bank of Jamaica. Because of course, you know, the SME is the engine of growth for the Jamaican economy. And we represent 80% of employment and give the government billions in taxes. And therefore, I was open to hear more where the government and DBJ is concerned. But I'm sure when she closes her budget presentation, she will have more goodies for the SME sector.
I think that's so important that you put it in context then. You not only having had that conversation with her taking the feedback, but then saying, let me put some more things on the table for the minister to consider as she comes back in her budget presentation. Let's take a quick break here inside Lead Story Prime as we go through not only what the budget said, but what it did not say and why it matters to you at home here on CVM Television.
The morning. Elegance isn't just seen, it's sensed. Set on Jamaica's north coast, the Montego Bay Convention Center rises with intention. A space designed to inspire, connect, and lead. Polished, purpose-built, poised for what's next. Step into a venue where scale meets serenity, where openness isn't just a design, it's a philosophy. This is more than a venue. This is where vision checks in.
The following statement is a formal apology required by the Broadcasting Commission as a remedial action for breach of license by CVM TV. Pursuant to the Broadcasting and Radio Rediffusion Act, the Broadcasting Commission has determined that on November 9, 2024, between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m., CVM TV aired the program On Stage that contained graphic verbal expletives which were not fit for transmission. The broadcast therefore breached the television and sound broadcasting regulations and the Children's Code for Programming. It is particularly concerning that the broadcast was at a time of day when children could reasonably be a part of the viewing audience, even incidentally. The management of CVM apologizes to its viewers for the offensive broadcast. We also acknowledge that the airing of prohibited and harmful content was irresponsible and unacceptable. We give the assurance that corrective measures have been taken to prevent any recurrence. The preceding statement was a formal apology required as remedial action for a breach of license by CVM TV, pursuant to the Broadcast and Radio Rediffusion Act.
Welcome back to Lead Story Prime. Tonight we are discussing the minister's budget presentation with Minister of Finance and the Public Service Fable Williams opening Jamaica's budget just today. But the minister made specific arguments about some of the things that had been highlighted in the budget that had been tabled and the feedback that she received from the Independent Fiscal Commission, including the GDP deflator. This is big fancy language. We're going to make the economists explain it to us. But the Independent Fiscal Commission flagged that the narrative that the minister shared in the tabled report in February implied a GDP deflator that appears high relative to current inflation trends. That is, that she was saying inflation was supposed to be running around 9 to 10%. We are currently at about 3.7. They're saying the two don't quite math the way that she was hoping to. The minister's response was direct. Today, she argued that in post-disaster conditions, with construction costs surging, the deflator can diverge significantly from where we're expecting it to go, the consumer price index. Try buying cement, hiring a mason. Those are effectively her words. Joseph Cox, is she right? Is a GDP deflator argument a legitimate one that the IFC has raised?
No, well, it is legitimate because one of the things you have to recognize what exactly is a GDP deflator and what exactly is what is measuring inflation.
Yeah, I forgot to explain that to all of us first, Joseph Cox. Take time with us because a lot of this becomes incredibly technical language, but it does matter for those individuals who are pricing their goods and services, especially small businesses like those represented by Garnet Reed tonight.
All right, let me start. With the CPI, your inflation, it's a relative movement of prices. And what it is that it is basically comparing a basket of goods, one basket of goods against another over a period, so a year or in some cases per quarter or whatever. Some countries that do it per month. So it's just that. But then it's the limitation with that is that it depends on what constitutes the basket. The basket does not cover every single thing. It does not. Whereas your GDP deflator is really a discounting mechanism that you are using now to determine what is the real value of the call it goods and services that would obtain in a market. So it takes into consideration pretty much everything that you would in a notional way, obviously, but to really use it to discount it. Now, the argument about the divergence, honestly, it's not something I would make a heavy weather about in the scheme of things, because then yes, during a hurricane or any kind of extraordinary shock to an economy, you are going to get divergence in terms of some of the metrics that you would be using. But it's not something I would have made particularly heavy weather of. But the fact of life is that these are the kinds of conversations that we need to have honestly. And frankly, part of the challenge that I was having today, even listening to the minister as it was, is that I kept wanting more explanations. I wanted more details. And that's where I will land with that one. But in terms of the thing, the CPI, we all know what it is. You have certain weights that are accorded to certain things. So this is basically, think about it this way. It's how they do the weighting is a percentage of your income, basically, of the average income that's expended on certain types of things. So you have things for food, for housing, for education, health, etc., etc. So it's a weighting, but obviously when you're talking about an economy, average really does not. In some cases, some people would never identify what's in the basket really, or the expenditure patterns. Because, for example, for the more impoverished among us, they spend a much higher percentage of their income on food, as distinct from others who are more affluent, and therefore yes, there's a shift in terms of people spending more. Sometimes they have some people who spend over 50% of this income on rent, on housing, mortgage, whatever. right?
And we don't
Versus
want
somebody
that
who doesn't have
at
it.
all.
Right?
So, and I said we don't want that at all. That inflated part of your income now going to housing well, as opposed to other things that it can be used for. Janelle McEwen, let me pull you in here because Joseph Cox has spoken to us now about some of the more technical terms that we have heard here. And as we're trying to figure out now what's going on, we also want to know what kind of budget and what kind of country that the minister was setting us up for. Because after 10 years, we are the world's darling. We have gone through everything in order to have our debt to GDP ratio move down from 140% to where it is now, about 70% in 10 years. But Janelle McEwen, with all of these big moves that we have made, Hurricane Melissa has pushed us back. We need discretionary reconstruction funds to be important, part of the government spend, and we have billions of US dollars that we need in order to get that up and running. When you look at this budget, Joseph Cox has said he has questions, but here's a big one for you. Is this budget the budget for the future? The budget that says we need to be a country that spends more in order to the building that we need to do? Or is it one that remembers that we were the darling of the world, that we were able to build on our debt to GDP ratio? And so it says, let's keep on that same trajectory, even if the kind of building that we want and the kind of spending that might be necessary, we just don't want to get involved in that right now.
This is definitely a budget for the future. And why I say this is because if you look at the move the government has made in order to really ensure that we have a sustainable future as it relates to fiscal management, we look at the fact that they have rather introduced tax rather than to borrow heavily. Yes, we would have secured a blended finance package of approximately 6.7 billion. That was great, and that was because of our fiscal management, right? Coupled with the CRIF and the catastrophe bond. That is important also as we move towards renewing those climate resilient fund and disaster risk protection fund. So it is important you look at the direction to where this is going. After 8 years, they're introducing new taxes. That should say everything, right? It's 19 million they're expected left, right? The problem again lies where how do they ensure that this will be collected? We still heard little about taxes on digital services. How will that be implemented? Right? That is also something I was looking for a little bit more on that. And also I must make mention that the introduction of NARA, National Resilient and Reconstruction Authority, was a very bold move in securing a sustainable and a climate resilient future. That was also important. Also want to make...
But hold on, Janelle McEwen. I can't make you go from there because we just put up NARA a while ago. NARA has been established, a National Reconstruction and Resilience Authority. Big move there. However, we have heard that the government last year wasn't spending enough money on capital expenditure. In fact, underspending. NARA has been created. It's still looking for a CEO. It has no project list, no plan. And the minister said today she's expecting the private sector to be driving a lot of the growth in the country. It doesn't look like even if NARA gets set up tomorrow, it is in a position to do the sort of mass spending that we are hoping for. Are we then being told of a promise that cannot be fulfilled in the public sector because the government has no control over the private sector?
Right, that and those are some of the rosy assumptions that the Fiscal Commission would have made mention of, because how can it that we have a National Reconstruction Resilient Authority? We created it, but until this date, we have not found a CEO. I'm not aware of that one. Neither the other positions are not filled. That was important. And I believe that the budget should have set out with the blueprint of NARA, because I also believe that it should have been an organization to steer the growth or the reconstruction of the country. So that was a big issue for me. And yes, the capital budget has been underspent by approximately 32% last year. That is a big problem. And it raises a lot of red flags, is to say that how can we hold this government accountable that they will spend enough for recovery? And it is a question yet to be answered. And hopefully, Prime Minister's budget speech, this will be addressed.
All right, we're waiting for that as well. Another big figure to raise here with Garnet Reid is now $29 billion. After 10 years, 10 budgets, we now heard that there are new taxes. Garnet Reid, this is a thing that many Jamaicans had been, the no new taxes song had been one that Jamaicans, no matter what political stripe, were very, very happy about. But that record ended on February 12th when the budget had been laid. The largest single measure, a new tax on sweetened beverages, 2 cents per milliliter, a 500 milliliter soda is now $10 more. Government revenue is expected to be $10.1 billion. For tobacco, $3 more per stick, a pack of 20, $60 more. Alcohol, specific excise increases across categories. You heard Janelle McEwen talk there about digital subscriptions and trying to figure out how that is going to work. Well, Netflix, Amazon, Spotify, now subject to GCT at 15%. You represent small businesses who sell drinks, who sell cigarettes, who are now looking and saying, all right, what does this mean for me in my household as I spend, but also for the consumers who might be coming to me? As you heard the tax package that the minister laid out today, on behalf of your association, what were your thoughts?
Well, my thoughts is that over the past 10, 11 years, there was an absence of no new taxes. And therefore, I believe the minister budget presentation shape on economic growth, job creation, and recovery. Okay? So, she tax sweetened beverages. Okay? I know it will have an impact. Where Miss Matty, who sell at the school shop, where she's going to pay, she had to increase her drinks to these children and to our customer. And so we have to face that. But there comes a time that we believe that we have to, the government have to tax to find the money to grow the economy and to run the country. Alcohol, tobacco, who can afford it, will afford it, and so that's where we are right now. But
so you're not bothered by the sin taxes, as they've been called, prohibitions on behaviors that you're hoping to decrease, like alcohol consumption, tobacco consumption.
That is,
and the sweetened drinks, you're saying, Miss Matty, sell the children water instead, maybe help them be healthier. That is correct,
right.
Okay.
Because, of course, what we have, we're seeing an increase of diabetes, and diabetes caused from sweetened drinks, etc. Even with some of the sodas, you're like 18%. So I am in favor for the government to increase the sweetened drinks, put a tax on it, and put a tax on tobacco, alcohol, etc.
As a way to help rebuilding?
As a way to help rebuilding and economic growth and job creation.
But that $29.5 billion that had been raised now by the minister is not in fact $29.5 billion. The Independent Fiscal Commission had said, hold on, I don't believe that $11.4 billion is credible. They only believe that $18 billion was credible. The $11.4 taken from NHT, they said that shouldn't be part of what they're looking at.
So we're expecting, you're saying that we're going to have a shortfall?
We're looking like we're having a shortfall. Let's talk about that shortfall in a moment when we come back, because I want to get Garnet Reid's perspective on that and our other guests. We look through the budget today inside Lead Story Prime.
We'll take you beneath the surface.
Greetings and salutations. My name is Orville Higgins, and it's another edition of Fan Central.
Talking to the people at the heart of the top sporting stories. Hear from your favorite sportsmen and women and the administrators who work tirelessly to make it all happen. It's live sports talk.
I've written an entire article.
Yes.
Looking at all the major issues every Tuesday at 9 p.m. It's Fan Central.
your journey with a Jane Bank Small Business Loan, with small business loans with as little as $10,000 and up to $4 million.
The time is 8:30.
Hi, I am Candy Pang.
What a guan?
What's a guan?
That's a guan.
What a guan?
What a guan?
What a guan! Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 10 p.m. on CVM TV.
That's a guan. What a guan?
Thanks so much for staying with us inside Lead Story Prime. We're going through the budget today because Minister of Finance and the Public Service, Favour Williams, opened Jamaica's budget debate today. And we're looking now at some of the implications. One of the big ones is that the Independent Fiscal Commission took a look at the budget and said, well, maybe some of this is not credible, and indicated that the money taken from the National Housing Trust, $11.4 billion, shouldn't be a revenue line at all, meaning that the $29.4 billion that we've been speaking about, it really now drops down to $18 billion that will be recovered thanks to the revenue measures by the government. Garnet Reid, before the break, we were talking about what that might mean, especially as small businesses now are looking and saying they're going to have to pay the taxes on these sugary drinks first, on these cigarettes first, on these what else is it? Alcohol and tobacco products first before there's anything else. So what is it then that we are hoping to see when the minister now admits that the line item is really $18 million and she's now taken out the money that has been taken from the National Housing Trust and moved it to a new line, meaning $18 billion now is what she'll be able to collect thanks to these new revenue measures?
Well, I anticipate that when the minister closes our budget presentation, she will bring a new figure to the nation. I'm sure the technocrats are sitting down and looking at all, punching the numbers, and I'm sure when she closes our budget presentation, she will bring bring a new figures to the country and the nation. Again, the small business people who sell, you call them solar, not micro, solar, will be called upon to pay the taxes. We have no choice after 10, 11 years of no new taxes. And I believe the government, again, need to find funds to run the country and grow the economy. What has happened, though, is the procurement process is taking too long for recovery. For example, I was in St. Elizabeth, where a number of fish vendors was opening up their vending store and so on. And a journalist from another media house called me and said, no, St. Elizabeth is now open. What do you think? And my reply was, yes, St. Elizabeth is open, but we need to open other parishes like Trelawney, Hanover, to ensure that commerce up and running. Because you see, you can't just open one parish. You have to open if you want the economy to stimulate
especially
and grow.
Since the western end of Jamaica, about half the number of parishes that we had were hit by Hurricane Melissa. The strongest category or hurricane to make landfall in the Atlantic, something that has now been retired by the World Meteorological Organization because of how devastating a hurricane it was.
It was, and therefore, you know, in December, I went to a number of shops and I asked them, what is happening? They said they're not doing well at all. sales dropped by 50 to 56%. I asked why. They said because part of the country shut down. You don't have an interchange of exchange of networking of funds and so on and so forth. But the procurement process is taking too long. I see where the Prime Minister himself was very, very disappointed and upset where the procurement process is concerned. I was told that in the procurement you have procurement committee, you have recovery committee, you have audited committee. This is crazy.
And
we need a country we need commerce up and running.
We've had conversations about that here inside Lead Story Prime, in particular about how the procurement process works and where there might be bottlenecks, how those can be eliminated. And an emergency like Hurricane Melissa has emergency procurement guidelines that can be utilized during this time. So that's one of the big things to be highlighted. Let me pull in, though, Joseph Cox here for a minute, because we also have a difference between what the minister had initially shared in the budget about how much damage and destruction happened to Jamaica. The minister shared, the nation heard, we would be on February 12 looking at $1.5 trillion, $1.5 trillion in damage thanks to Hurricane Melissa. The Planning Institute of Jamaica, the PIOJ, on March 3, when they shared their estimates, said it was now not 1.4, 1.5, $1.952 trillion. That's $452 billion in difference. That's a big difference, Joseph Cox, for us to plan our budget, lay a budget before Parliament in February, and now on March 3 hear that the number is revised upward more. Did you hear anything today that made that revision and the reassessments for that revision clear? Because the minister did use that figure, but did you see some realigning of the budget now to accommodate for it?
As I understand it, and I'm subject to guidance to this, in terms of the revised figure, I believe that it includes
Joseph Cox? Well, let me move to Janelle McEwen then here on this, because Janelle, as we're having this conversation, that figure moved up and $452 billion extra is a lot of extra money that we're now being asked to accommodate for, thanks to the PIOJ revising their estimates. What does that mean for Jamaicans hearing this budget and now seeing a gap already in place as we start talking about what their households might need?
Right, so that was a huge gap, and I was surprised when I saw it. But what is actually taken into consideration is more of the indirect expenses, and I believe that the minister's budget did not include indirect expenses. And by that, what I mean is that they only accounted for the direct expenditure of losses. So other expenditures, for example, like if it is that persons are going through trauma and you need to have some psychologists to deal with those kind of issues. So they didn't consider some of those factors, and that's what the PIOJ did. They went ahead and calculated indirect costs onto that cost, and that's what raised the cost to that level. So again, what will happen is that as the minister closes her budget presentation, I believe that more will come to light. However, it is important and it was necessary to address some of these issues in the first presentation.
Jenny McEwen, let me just pull you on something that you said to us here inside Lead Story as we were looking at the budget and the lead up now to the budget presentation, because households are also to be benefiting, the sweetener, if you will, with the income tax threshold that's supposed to be moved up. For those making about $1.8 million, they should be getting about $4,700 more. With all the taxes that you've seen, the revenue measures put in place, even with all that we have here as support, do you think people will be starting to feel that tax bracket move up, that income tax threshold relief, or do they see it immediately taken out by now the taxes that they have to pay for sugary drinks, for alcohol, for things that are affected by the environmental levy, which would be those things imported into Jamaica, and the whole tax package that we have before us?
That's a very great question. And yes, taxes erode your purchasing power and you have to pay more. So with the increase in the income tax, the government felt the need to continue with it. And it was for this specific reason, because they were going to introduce tax. They could not have pushed this back. Then it would put so much pressure on the middle to lower income class families. And you can't have that because they're already being squeezed. And you have to find a way to ensure that they are able to sustain themselves. And one of the points that I also want to make is that the government has started a lot of programs to give back to vulnerable families and PATH program, elderly, etc. Today I saw some line at a Western Union. It was so long, it was unbelievable. And we can also talk about Ruth and what it is doing, assisting families with recovery, if you may call it that, up to 500,000 they can receive. So when you just isolate these things, it will look really bad, and you will see the impact. But when you couple it with all that is happening in around the economy, you can see where it will work out for persons who are, for example, getting that additional 4,000 because of the improvement in the income tax report. So you can't just look at it isolatedly, because if you do that, then it will look really, really bad. But if you look at all that the government is doing, especially for the lower class families and PATH program and other social program, so you'll see the benefits.
All right. Well, putting it together then is what we'll do. We'll put up some numbers on the screen, because a $29.5 billion tax package means that for your sweetened drink, a 500 milliliter soft drink, you'll pay approximately $10 more. Your Netflix standard subscription, you'll pay approximately 15% more each month. A pack of cigarettes, $60 more. A bottle of rum, more expensive. Virtually all imported consumer goods, marginally more expensive through the environmental levy increase. Are we looking at a situation there where the sweetener is bigger than the medicine, Joseph Cox?
Well, for me, to be honest with you, when I look at the numbers, the first thing is that when I remember hearing Garnet raise this issue about potential health benefits with the sweetened tax, if you look at the quantum that is actually being projected, 10.1 billion, that does not suggest any great change in behavior. But that is one. Two, we have to recognize now, with the sweetened drink, with the tobacco, alcohol to an extent, and so on, we have to recognize that these things, they are actually contingent upon effective enforcement. Right. We have gone here before where we have put taxes on cigarettes. I don't know if you remember a time where we had something in Jamaica we called BD. Right, which was basically the some kind of informal cigarette thing with the tobacco and so on and so forth. Then you also have illegal cigarette trades that you have to guard against. In terms of the sweetened drink, we have to be careful, because people will just go basically and buy syrup and start to do their own drink. So the soft drink thing, yeah, we have to get more details on that, because we have to recognize that a lot of, for example, a lot of the things that are used for elderly people and so on, those have a sugar content. We have to be careful of what exactly is it that we claim we're taxing and what we're trying to do, right? And of course, when you look at the so-called sin taxes, I keep asking one simple question. I don't know if any of you agree with me. But what, gambling is not a sin, I suppose, in that context? Why is it that aspect has been routinely ignored? I don't understand that.
And there's also been something raised as well about the sweetened drink tax, Joseph Cox. It's the single largest consumer-facing revenue measure in the budget, but there's been no discussion about whether it's been ring-fenced to deal with things like public health and the like. Well, Precisely. We'll take a break inside Lead Story now and get your final comments after this here inside Lead Story Prime.
The following statement is a formal apology required by the Broadcasting Commission as a remedial action for breach of license by CVM TV, pursuant to the Broadcasting and Radio Rediffusion Act. The Broadcasting Commission has determined that on November 9, 2024, between 8 p.m. and 9 p.m., CVM TV aired the program On Stage that contained graphic verbal expletives, which were not fit for transmission. The broadcast therefore breached the television and sound broadcasting regulations and the Children's Code for Programming. It is particularly concerning that the broadcast was at a time of day when children could reasonably be a part of the viewing audience, even incidentally. The management of CVM apologizes to its viewers for the offensive broadcast. We also acknowledge that the airing of prohibited and harmful content was irresponsible and unacceptable. We give the assurance that corrective measures have been taken to prevent any recurrence. The preceding statement was a formal apology required as remedial action for a breach of license by CVM TV, pursuant to the Broadcast and Radio Rediffusion Act.
Hey, what up, one? Hi, I am Candy Pang.
What a guan?
What a guan?
That a guan pa.
What a guan? What a guan?
What a Guan! Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays at 8 a.m., 1:30 p.m., and 10 p.m. on CVM TV.
And that's a guan pa. What a guan?
Thanks so much for staying with us inside Lead Story Prime. This is the final segment of this big show as we look to see what the minister said today as she opened the budget presentation. I want to start with a core strategic question here, and I'm going to pose that to Garnet Reid here, President of the Small Business Association, because Minister Williams spoke today for an extended period about financial sector reform. She talked about pension funds, insurance companies, trading platforms, and her case was clear. Jamaica must use more of its own savings to finance its own recovery. In other words, less dependence, more self-financing. Now, from where you sit, from a strategic perspective,
yes,
does that sound like for a small business owner who is trying to make their way out of it, that sounds like the best plan, or is it moving too much of the reconstruction burden onto domestic capital that was built for other purposes and small business owners who have other bills to pay?
That sounds like medium and large business to me.
So not the small people at all?
No, but it's a good move for the financial sector to reform. Long overdue. Over the past 2 years, I've been lobbying against the commercial bank to reduce their interest rate to help the SME sector. When you reduce your interest rate, you will have more people borrow more money. I think interest rate between 14 to 15%. Borrow more money to pay their mortgages, to pay their loans, and so on and so forth. When you hold interest rate, you will disqualify the SME sector with working capital to grow their businesses where that is concerned. The minister in our budget presentation, I didn't hear anything about grant funding.
Grant
funding is very, very important.
Especially for SMEs?
Yeah, SME, yes, we do. You have small and medium-sized enterprise who need SME to grow their businesses.
Why do they need grants at a time like this?
Because
money that they don't have to repay.
That's correct, because nothing is happening. There are thousands, hundreds of small business operators don't know how they're going to pay their light bill tomorrow. Don't know how they're going to buy goods for the shop. Right? I was at a meeting at the Ministry of Investment, Industry and Commerce. And when I walk in the meeting, I said to the minister, are we when the Hurricane Melissa just started, I said to the minister, are we going to give grant? He said, oh, you come late, we're going to give more than that. Today, nothing have happened. where grant is
And that's
concerned.
Minister Aubin Hill
That's correct,
in that
for the
meeting.
micro, small and medium-sized enterprises. So grant is very, very important, and I'm hoping when the minister closes her budget presentation, she will have some goodies in the basket.
I love how Garnet Reed says, here, see, well, maybe it was in the first part, but minister, you get a chance to redeem yourself. Geneva Q1, we're also watching global war. We've been having conversations about that with Israel and the U.S. now striking Iran. We have now seen oil prices move up and move down. The minister didn't offer revised oil price assumptions. The oil price assumption, I understand, was at 60. We're looking at 74, even higher. She did acknowledge the Middle East situation. She pointed to the net international reserves as the buffer. But help us all out. If this external shock continues, at what point does a responsible government have to come back to Parliament and say, oopsie, the assumptions that we had in the budget have now changed? Is there a trigger or something that we look for? Does it simply, we just run on confidence until the numbers push us to then make a decision afterwards?
Interesting that we align the point of the net international reserve being at record levels. So it's around at 6.9 billion, and that is like, we're way ahead the 12 months threshold that we could have been at. We're now at 36 months. And that is equivalent to, we can spend US 100 million per week for 9 months. That's actually great. And it does provide a cushion from these global spikes. And we would have
So you're saying that, like Keenan Faulkner yesterday, Jamaica has savings. So some of these things going on around the world shouldn't matter to us, because Pakistan, for example, had to close government buildings now only 4 days a week. They've closed schools for 2 weeks. Others have said work from home because they don't have oil. You're saying Jamaica is fine?
No, I'm not saying that.
No?
Okay. What I'm saying is that we're in a position where if it should get worse, or if it should worsen, we can offer some cushion to our consumers. And what you realize with the global oil prices currently, like for example, the Brent crude or the West Texas intermediary, is that it's fluctuating rapidly, and it's basically based on what the president is saying. The president has pledged, that Donald Trump, he has pledged to protect going through the Hormuz Strait. So, and you would have seen where prices dropped significantly when he just uttered those words. So
we saw the Asian markets respond to that, and we also saw the U.S. Navy today take vessels through the Strait of Hormuz. Are you saying that with that happening here, the sort of concerns about price shocks might now dissipate by the time people start saying we need to revise the assumptions?
Yes, and also we must make mention that the raise in global oil prices does not directly impact our fuel price as relates to percentage. So say, for example, the global oil price is raised by 80%. That will not be impact our fuel prices by 80% because of the metrics and how the petrojam, they adjust their prices. So we have to also bear that in mind. So it's not a direct proportionality as it relates to the increases, right? So that's the reason why sometimes we see oil prices drop, and then our gas prices does not drop at the same time. So that is something that we have to also pay attention to.
All right. Let me ask you guys some questions before we go. Joseph Cox, the minister today confirmed the damage at US $12 billion. The support package that is coming in is US $6.7 billion. That's about half. New tax measures, Jamaican $18 billion. That's not a lot when converted to US. The body built to lead the reconstruction, NARA, not mentioned by name. The recovery depends on private sector activity the government cannot control. And Jamaicans are paying more for their soda, their cigarettes, their digital subscriptions, and their imported goods to fund a gap that hasn't been fully accounted for. Will this budget work, Joseph Cox?
Well, put it to you this way, where I probably shift from Janelle a bit is in terms of the oil prices, because frankly speaking, that is also a function of time. If the oil prices remain considerably higher than what was projected for us, what will happen is that Jamaica will find itself in a bit of a revenue paradox, Because please remember that our petrol prices, for argument's sake, has a very high tax, tax take, right? And therefore, what will happen, or what could happen, is that you also get a bump in the revenue, a considerable bump in the revenue, or coming out of that, even though it is undermining basically the very base of the economy that it needs to support.
Yes or no, will the budget work?
Put this way.
Say maybe, Joseph, because right now the yes or no seem to be beating you.
If the war continues, unabated, the reality of life in another probably 90 days, the minister may well have, she might find herself right back in Parliament with a supplementary estimate.
All right, let me ask Garnet Reid before we go. Does the budget work, yes or no?
Yes, I think it can work, but if the war continue in the Middle East, that's the Iran-Israel war,
yes.
The minister may have to go back to Parliament where that is concerned.
All right, Janelle McEwen, before we go, will the budget work?
Yes, I believe it will work, and if adjustments have to be made, then we have to give this government the opportunity to do so.
All
they
right.
have proven with their track record to get things done.
They can't work on hypotheticals, they can only work on what's in front of them. And we had economists Janelle McEwen and Joseph Cox, and as well the president of the Small Business Association of Jamaica, Garnet Reid, helping us figure out what the minister said, where she went in all these various areas, and what they're expecting to hear more from her on. Thank you. Thank you all for joining us tonight inside Lead Story Prime. Now, Minister Williams calls this budget a moment of consequence. And she's right. This is a moment when decisions made in Parliament translate into real costs in real houses across real parishes, still recovering from a Category 5 hurricane. That weight is real, and Lead Story doesn't at all attempt to dismiss it. But here's what Lead Story Prime cannot let pass tonight. The minister made an admission on the floor of Parliament that deserves to echo beyond this evening. She said government capital underspending is real and a historic problem. And then she said it doesn't matter because the recovery will be driven by the private sector, by insurance companies refurbishing hotels, by households rebuilding, by investors deciding Jamaica is worth the capital. Now, that argument may prove correct. Jamaicans are resilient. Businesses are resilient. The evidence of recovery is real. But resilience is not a fiscal policy. And so we continue to watch and see how Jamaica recovers after Hurricane Melissa. That's it for today's edition of Lead Story Prime. I'm Jody Ann Quarry, and on behalf of the entire CVM production team and our guests tonight, thank you so very much for joining us inside the show. Have a fantastic evening. Be safe and stay with us, as up next we have Fan Central.
Internationally acclaimed On Stage with Winfred Williams.
At a new time, Saturdays at 8 p.m. on CVM TV.
So much more than entertainment.
Let's delve deep into the issues. We'll take you beneath the surface.
Greetings and salutations. My name is Orville Higgins, and it's another edition of Fan Central.
Talking to the people at the heart of the top sporting stories. Hear from your favorite sportsmen and women and the administrators who work tirelessly to make it all happen. It's live sports talk.
I've written an entire article.
Yes.
Looking at all the major issues every Tuesday at 9 p.m. It's Fan Central.